I am joined today by Rachael Heffer. Hello, Rachael.
Good morning. Lovely to be with you.
Now, we have been connected by a mutual friend and a colleague of yours, Wendy.
We have indeed. Yeah, good friend and a colleague of mine at the Evangelical Alliance.
She makes me smile. I met her at London City Mission for a networking and communications event, and she was one of the speakers. And she makes me smile. She brings joy and shares joy. That's how I would describe her.
She absolutely does. We have become good friends over our mutual love of all things shiny, glittery, and we both like to talk. So that's a good combination.
You should do a podcast. That'd be really cool. You're just talking away. Right. So we're here to talk a little bit about what you're doing. Let's just start with the EA and we'll come back to that as well. But just because I've spoken to Phil recently, who shared a little bit about the EA. But what's the Evangelical Alliance from your perspective for people who think, yeah, I still don't know what it is?
Absolutely. Well, the Evangelical Alliance has been around for a while. So we, as an organisation, were founded in 1846. So that's a good 180 or so years, isn't it? And we are basically a unity organisation. So what our heart is really to work together, serving the evangelical Christian church across the UK. And as our strapline says, together make Jesus known. So I don't know about you, I love working in partnership. I think it shows kingdom values, doesn't it? But as a membership organisation, we seek to connect with and unite with individual members, so individual Christians like you and me across the UK to strengthen us, cheer us on in our own faith sharing, and so on. But we also work with lots of member organisations and member churches. So a big part of my role and many other teams across the EA is to really lean in, cheer on, champion the local church, serve, resource, equip, train, whatever it is that we can do to draw closer to church leaders who always do an amazing and valiant job on the ground, don't they? But also to speak on their behalf into some of the corridors of power as well, I guess, in Westminster and across the nations, so that we can really see that Christian voice brought into those corridors of power, into all the big cultural and contested issues of the day, but at grassroots level to be working with the local church as well. So it's quite varied, the work that we do, but hopefully that gives you a little snapshot.
It's a bit of a nice overview. Just because I like to do this, just explain for people what's an evangelical in the UK.
Well, an evangelical Christian is somebody who believes, first of all, I guess, that the Bible is the true and rooted word of God. So again,
Amen.
As we look at all of the big cultural conversations of our day, we'll know that actually sometimes we drift away from some of that. But an evangelical Christian absolutely believes that the word of God still informs our life in the everyday today. We also believe that actually as individuals, we come to a point of conversion. We make that decision for ourselves as to whether we want to believe and follow God. And so we make that decision to then go on, but that impacts our lifestyle and hopefully for our lifetime as well. So in making that decision, as evangelical Christians, we believe that we're rooted in the good news. And so having made that decision, it means that we actually then have to take action. And part of the action is to not just keep that good news to ourselves, but with all that belief about Jesus' death and resurrection, the Bible, as I said, in its full entirety, we want to share that with others. So the heart of the evangelical, I think, is to be a good news bringer. And don't we need that in the world today? And indeed, even across the church at times.
Yeah, I think so. I've worked for the church for a time and it's quite hard sometimes to motivate people, but it gets easier at Easter and it gets easier at Christmas because those are two big events where people who don't know church necessarily, 2, 3, 4 generations, will suddenly automatically got to go to church. They may not even understand perhaps the real reasons why, but they're drawn to it. And it's easier at these bigger events to get people rallied in the churches who, okay, let's put some better flowers out. Let's really look at the candles that are dripping everywhere. Let's clean things up. And all of a sudden, because we know we are more on display, all of us, we want to do more. But actually, we're always on display as Christians, aren't we?
Absolutely, we are, aren't we? And so much about living a Christian life is about being authentic in the day to day, isn't it? You know, not just inviting people just at Christmas time or Easter time, or as you said, sort of making, a bigger splash then, albeit that they are amazing opportunities, aren't they, to draw people in from our community who may not join our churches week in, week out. But one of the aspects of my work, my role is head of mission at the EA. And one of the things that I've been speaking to for the last 2.5 years or so is a piece of UK research called the Talking Jesus Research. It's part of a six-way partnership, but that speaks into some of exactly what you just said, that actually, whilst we might think that people in our friendship groups or our family are a bit further off, actually it tells us that, and I'll throw a couple of stats your way just to whet your appetite. 20% of the UK do say that they believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So that's quite astounding, isn't it? 1 in 5 of our friends will believe that Jesus is indeed not just a normal human being who walked the earth, but actually the Son of God. And a really astounding fact that surprised us all when we did this big piece of credible national research with a secular research body, told us that 45% of the UK do believe that Jesus died and rose again. So I don't know about you, that really shocked me when that came out. 45% of the UK would say that they believe in the resurrection. So just as you said there, actually, you know, people are not coming necessarily cold if they do join us at Christmas time or Easter, but actually maybe in terms of their own spirituality and what's bubbling up, and indeed the questions that they're asking, which we also went on to find out. You know, it's a great opportunity, isn't it, to draw alongside, invite them, and who knows what God might do in those moments where they encounter us as Christians, but also come into church buildings. Or indeed, dare I say, we encounter them on the streets, singing carols, sharing mulled wine and mince pies, whatever, but sharing the good love of the love of Jesus, you know, with good news at Christmas time or Easter, as you said. So there's loads of opportunity for us, isn't there?
There really is, and those they are big stats, though, aren't they? 45% of people believe that Jesus died and rose again is a huge stat. That means that every other person that we meet, actually, in a sense, is already ready to have a conversation about God, either because they already are in love with Jesus Christ for the first time, or because maybe it's the second time for them, or it'll be the final time before glory. But people actually are hungry, and I think we carry back, don't we? Maybe it's a partly British thing, I don't know. We hold back because we don't want to offend anybody, but actually, this is really good news that we've got to share.
It's really good news. And I think one of the problems has been, maybe for us as individual Christians, but also as the church, is that, and I don't know whether you'd agree with me here, but I think the media has played such a negative part in making us as individual Christians over the last few decades actually retreat and retreat and retreat, and to shrink back as the UK church, as maybe further afield, because it's told us that, do you know what, if you speak about your faith, if you share Jesus, if you talk of your experience, people won't want to know. They'll shut you down. They might even sort of not want to be friends. Actually, what the research tells us is altogether a different story. So again, sharing a few of the stats with you, 53% of the UK tell us that they do know a practicing Christian. So somebody who attends a worshiping community and would say that they read the Bible and that they pray at least weekly. So 53% of people know us. But this is the really good news bit. When they went on, we asked them, if you were to describe that Christian that you know, how would you describe them? What adjectives would you use? Now, I don't know what you'd say, Andy, but most of us would think it's going to be, you know, negative, narrow-minded, homophobic, whatever it is. Actually, top 4 stats that came out, they think we're good-humoured, we're generous, we're friendly, we're caring. And those were the top 4 stats that came out. They also went on to say that we're hopeful, that we're authentic, that we're peaceful. And when I've been speaking to this Talking Jesus research, which is all free to have a look at or download, talkingjesus.org, but with church leaders, with individual Christians, you can imagine it makes us sit up and kind of go, oh, really? That's what they think of me? We went on to ask what people's reflections were of the church as a church body, as an institution. They weren't quite as positive, dare I say. 26% of the UK said that they thought the church could be narrow-minded. Similarly, 26% said that they felt the church could be hypocritical, but 22% said that they felt the church could be friendly and caring. So it certainly wasn't all bad news. But it shows us maybe that people's perception sometimes of the church, from either just perception or from heartache or hurt that's come from the past, actually sometimes there's a bigger barrier, dare I say, for them to come into our church buildings. But what it does tell us is that as an individual, for the friends that God has put around me, for the family that I'm in, actually, if they know us, they mainly know us. We went on to ask, if you think of the practicing Christian, who are they? We're predominantly a friend. 35% of people said the Christian they think of is a friend, closely followed by a family member. So I think what it tells us is that in the current context, actually, the media has fed us a lot of lies. People don't want to shut us down. They are more open than we think. And actually, if they know us, they like us. If they like us, hopefully they trust us. And actually, if then we dare to share something of our faith, even if they don't agree, hopefully they have a respect or even an interest. So people are, as you said, much more open than we think, I feel.
I shared this a little bit with Phil, but there was a piece of research done by the Church of England, maybe in the early 90s. How do people come to faith was one element of that. And it was such a clarity of it's friendships, it's people, not the church. Yes, some people will walk into a church and they'll meet God, and that's wonderful. And we should actively encourage and enable that. But it's not the majority. The majority of people come to Christian faith through their friends. And actually, the research you're doing, it's just backing up information that was gathered 30 years ago. And I imagine if we did a thing from 1,000 years ago, it's not going to change. It's personal relationships that are so more valuable.
Absolutely. And I think even more so over the last few years, I don't know if you'd agree, we've been through a lot, haven't we? You only go back to, of course, March 2020, which will be forever etched in our memories of our generation now, that, going through a global pandemic and shrinking back into our boxes during lockdown at home and so on. And actually, I don't know about you, but I craved those friendships. We survived family life. I'm married. I've got 2 teenage boys. But I really missed my friends. And I think actually coming through that, whilst many of us enjoyed sometimes some of the quieter elements of lockdown and so on, but for a lot of people, I think absolutely, as you said, it made us realise that we are so wired for relationship, aren't we? And I've certainly seen amongst my friends, as we've rehabilitated ourselves coming out of COVID and the pandemic. But then if you recall, we went into, the death of the Queen, the threat of war, the ongoing threat of war, cost of living crisis. Certainly, as I'm sure Phil might have spoken to as well, an epidemic of loneliness. And again, all that we see amongst, aspects of well-being and anxiety and so on. Just as you said, I think we're wired for relationship. Friendship is so important, isn't it? And in this big old journey of us believing in the Great Commission, passionately wanting to share just nuggets of our faith that might connect with somebody's life or heart, believing that God will do the rest. We don't need to say it all in one go. But I've certainly seen amongst my friendships as well, people are asking big questions, they're searching, they're sometimes wanting answers, and are much more open to things of spirituality and even faith, because we've been through a lot, and I think it's unsettled us somewhat. But God knows what he's doing. It wasn't a surprise to him, was it? So I think as Christians and as the church, we need to just ask ourselves, God, how can we be used alongside our friends, our family members, particularly at times of celebration like Christmas when we gather together and so on, and indeed across the year.
Those, I suppose, the high days and holidays thing, they are important because, I work for an Anglican church. It was huge. It was quite imposing as a building, but we get 800 people coming to, Christmas services. And when we first year, I saw all the plans of all the services that were coming with the guys and the brownies and whatever else groups, it was every day there was stuff going on, and people need something to look to. And the thing is, and this research is so exciting. Yeah, the church can be a good thing. The Christians, that's the, I suppose, the engine room of the faith, and that's why the Christian faith has continued to grow for 2,000 years and beyond, because it's not about an institution or a building, it's about people. And people tell stories, and that's the oral testament. I was fascinated, the Old Testament, the oral testament, and the New Testament. And I remember being in theology at A-level thinking, you what now? But this is when they tell stories, because that's what we're good at. And actually being a Christian, it's telling the story of God in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us as individual Christians to be able to really harness that thought, but to not be scared by it, not feel we have to tell a story in a certain way, but to actually just be ourselves, be in relationship with people, but to believe that God will use us, whether we're an introvert or an extrovert, whether we have a massive friends, whether we have 3 close friends, in the midst of that, absolutely, to share the story of, not just doing life together, actually, life in the raw, in the trudge sometimes, in the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, And again, I've seen even amongst my own peers, and close friends, the stuff of life that we go through, with, whether it's elderly or ill parents, whether it's juggling teenagers, whether it's, with toddlers, whether it's in workplace, all of these things, the rawness of life, it aligns us, doesn't it? It draws us to people. And yet, as you're saying, I think to be prayerful, to be intentional, to want our friends to draw closer to Jesus and to pray that actually God might bring about opportunities. It can be really powerful, can't it? And I've had opportunities, some that I've missed, and I've thought, oh, I should say something or share something of how God answered that prayer in my life, because that connects with what I was talking about on a walk with a friend, and I haven't. But equally, I've found over the last couple of years that I've challenged myself to just be that little bit bolder, a little bit braver. And a phrase that I've coined for myself, to be honest, is, what's the worst that can happen? One of the pieces of research tells us that one of the big questions that people are asking, in fact, the top question, that when we listed a load of questions through the Talking Jesus research and said, which of these questions might be top of your radar? And we found this, that the top answer, 19% of the UK were asking, will everything be okay? It was closely followed by, what will make me happy? What should I do with my life, particularly for the 18 to 24s bracket? Everyone across all age demographics were asking, what happens when you die? Again, not surprising, an age-old question that we all ask ourselves. But fascinating, I think, that most people were asking, will everything be okay? So I think absolutely against the backdrop of what you just said, people have got big questions. They're searching, sometimes from places of pain, not always, lots of good stuff to enjoy in our lives as well, aren't there? But again, how do we as friends draw close to people? And when they ask, will everything be okay? How do we share something of hope and light and truth into those situations? Hopefully because of what God's done in our life as well. But being a bit bolder and braver is a big challenge, I think, to us as Christians, but it is possible.
Amen to that. Let's go back in time a little bit. You're working for a Christian organization. You're clearly talking about God and Jesus personally within your own life. So what's your story of faith? What was your upbringing? Where did church fit into your life?
Yeah, thanks. So my story was, I grew up in Leicester, which was, I was part of a church there that was inner city, very multicultural, Leicester. So I love the fact that there was all the diversity of both, ethnicity and people sort of growing up on my doorstep, which has in part led into some of our work that we do with EA, again, looking to encourage churches to be intercultural and to be reflective of people on their doorstep. But I grew up in a Christian family. My parents were very embedded and involved in our church. So I was very blessed to have, all of that kind of the Sunday school and the youth group and lots of good friends, which I guess as a teenager kept me connected to church, because it's often friendships, isn't it, as well as the input of youth leaders or youth mentors. And I was very blessed in that context. But I remember at the age of 40, so I became a Christian at the age of 7, very simply through a church holiday club, and just say massive well done and keep going to all those children and youth leaders who keep going week in, week out. And I've been involved in youth ministry for 25 years, so I know it's often painstaking, sacrificial, but lots of blessings as well. But yeah, became a Christian at the age of 7, very simply, sitting on some stairs with a girl whose face I can never recall, but one day in heaven we'll see her and say, thanks for praying that simple prayer with me. But at 14, I was part of an Anglican church as well, growing up, as I said, in Leicester. And at 14, I was confirmed. And that for me was a real moment of saying, thanks, Mum and Dad. This is absolutely my own faith now that I wanted to live and dig into. And so I never really looked back from that, really, in terms of my faith journey. Went on to do a gap year in youth ministry, lived out in Paris for my year. I came back to go to university and did languages, and thought that would be my life trajectory, was passionate about people and culture and languages. But God had other plans, and coming out of university, I started work with British Youth for Christ, or YFC, who some people might know of. So a big international youth ministry organisation. And I moved down to Ely in Cambridgeshire, where I still live now, many moons on, to work with one of Youth for Christ local centres. I went on to then do 10 years, 14 years actually, all in with British Youth for Christ, 5 years with the Diocese of Ely, all of that in youth ministry, really sort of wanting to equip and serve and encourage the church, particularly digging into sharing the gospel with young people. So I suppose in terms of my faith journey, very fortunate looking back to have had many different people children's, Sunday school, youth workers and so on, investing in me. And as a result, praise God, I came to faith myself. And I'm still involved in lots of youth ministry now, again, believing that, and again, as the research tells us, many more people become Christians when they're young. So it's so important, isn't it, as churches, to really dig into our toddler, children's youth ministry. And that's part of my passion still today.
I was 7 too. I remember I was sat in a Baptist church. There was big creaky pews. I remember the creaking as they sort of were bolted to the floor, but not quite. And I remember sitting there as this lovely older couple just led me through a prayer and a bit of scripture. And yeah, in the same way, I've never looked back. And I had some amazing people who would come along, some older people. There were 3 older guys because my parents divorced, and I had these 3 guys who came along and were sort of heaven sent, I think, to be parts of a father figure that I'd lost, and they pointed me back to God as well as the ultimate father. And it was amazing how like you said, there are people along the way who just nudge and steer. One of the guys would go and do, here's a handbrake turn in the car park, which for me was cool. It was really awesome. And then a bag of chips. And there were other sort of aspects of it all. But we need those people, don't we, who can just inspire and nudge and keep pushing us along.
Yeah. And doesn't it show, again, the simplicity and yet the impact of those relationships? And I'm absolutely passionate about that. In our church here in Ely, go to a Baptist church as well, and we have a whole network of, we're not a huge church, but we have a network of about a dozen to 15 sort of teenagers and a network of youth mentors. And they are simply people just as you've described, people that when our young people become 13, we ask them and their parents, would they like somebody alongside to journey with them, to be that trusted, through all the safeguarding rules and regs, but that trusted individual alongside them, to just be interested, just be prayerful, just do the handbrake turns or the McDonald's milkshake or whatever it might be. But to have that impact. And again, harping back to some of those, the Talking Jesus stats, again, one of the questions that we asked people was, if you've had a conversation with a Christian, young or old, what do you remember from that conversation? And what came out was that the top answer was that people remember, first of all, that person being interested in them, to ask them what their thoughts were, what their beliefs were, and so on. And then that they next remember that person went on to share something of their own faith journey. So I only mention that to say, isn't that powerful? Actually draw alongside people just as those individuals did with you. And I similarly had 2 women who I just thought, when I was 15, 16, I thought they were my cool older friends. They were sort of late 20s into their 30s. I look back now and think, just as you had, they were very intentional, they were very friendly, they were very caring, they were with me on the journey. But they absolutely were mentoring me, not that I knew that at the time. And their impact on my life was significant. And they asked me, as that research tells, they asked me part of, what my beliefs were and how my life was, and, and guided me into a faith journey before I then went on to ask them. And so, again, coming back to that dynamic of friendship and intergenerational relationships as well, what an opportunity we have as the church, don't we, being across all ages, to actually have that amazing dynamic, particularly with young people, of nurturing them through. And by the sounds of it, those guys had a massive impact on your life, just as in the very simple, the normal, the everyday, but that authentic living of Christians who cared about me had a huge impact on my life. So I kind of figure that anyone can do that. We don't make it a massive big thing, do we? But just showing that care, prayer, and leaning in to other people, not just the young as well, but actually that can really show Jesus at work and be massively transformational in people's lives. So very doable. We just need to get on and do it, don't we?
The simple and the authentic is so powerful, isn't it? It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's what people are craving, isn't it? In a culture of so much distrust as well, particularly when we look at hierarchies, again, the political sphere, or even the monarchy, or leaders in our context and our culture. It certainly feels to me like we live in a culture of a lot of distrust. So, but again, that brings it back to the proximity piece, doesn't it? For us as Christians, those people that we might look around and think, well, those are the people I see in the playground, or those people I see in the gym, or those are in my workplace, or that one or two are, I just come across on the street when I'm walking the dog or something. Actually, what might God bring out of those opportunities? Because people might trust us more in those closer spheres of influence. And I'm sure you've heard, and I've heard of many stories where, again, through friendships, through that relationship, gradually sometimes people come to faith, and sometimes it's quicker than we might think. Just to share briefly on that point, both Phil Knox, who you mentioned, good friend and colleague of mine, and myself, we're doing a new piece of research at the moment, which will launch next spring, about June time, through the Evangelical Alliance. And at the moment, our working title is called Finding Jesus, Identifying Pathways to Faith in Adulthood. And just to give you an early snapshot into that, we've surveyed 300 people who've come to faith in the last 5 years. And we're asking, well, kind of why, how, what were the significant influences? And again, seeing some of the early insights, we're seeing that actually for some people, the faith journey has been within a year, which surprised me, actually, But again, friendship is key, prayer is key, and lots of other insights, which I won't share with you now, but do look out for that research that comes out maybe at some time in the spring, because that would help inform us again what's working and how is God meeting people in this day and season.
I got very excited by the title of that. I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. Right, let's just bring it on a little in time then. You're talking about your working with EA. How did you find yourself one morning walking into the office thinking, oh, I'm head of missions at EA? How did that happen?
Good question. So it came about because at the time just prior to working with the EA, I was working with the Diocese of Ely in the mission team. My role was a youth advisor, so very much connecting with the breadth of church across mainly the Church of England, but working in lots of partnerships ecumenically as well, which was great. But sensing, as we do, don't we sometimes, just that stirring of God kind of calling me on. I'd been there nearly 5 years. And again, it comes back to relationships. In part of my, I guess, how I do my sort of sensing, leaning in, prayer, and trying to listen to God was actually having a few conversations with people. And one of those conversations that I had, just kind of sensing where to go next, was with our now CEO, Gavin Calver, who's at the EA, who was a long-term friend and ministry colleague through our time back at Youth for Christ. And to cut a long story short, it was really in conversation with him and with others, me really praying, God, where would you have me go now as a next sort of ministry move, praying into that over a period of time, and just sort of seeing what doors would open, really. And it felt quite obvious over a period of months, really, that I should throw my hat in for one of the mission jobs at the Evangelical Alliance, which I did do. But it was a step of faith at a time when actually what I went in for was a shorter term role. It was a maternity leave job, actually, to which I said to Gavin, why would I go for a maternity leave job? I'm looking for a long-term ministry move. But you know what? I can only say that the call of that stirring of the Spirit was so strong that I just thought, okay, I'm going to trust you, Lord, that this is the right thing. Went for an interview, went through the whole process, and got the job. And it just, had the markings of the Spirit all over it, that kind of ping, 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 this just feels totally right. So I joined the mission team of the EA. And again, to fast forward a little bit of that time, I oversaw a lot of our evangelism resources and partnerships. Again, love working in mission partnerships across the breadth of the evangelical church. And when Gavin became our CEO in October 2019, I then took on the role as head of mission. And yes, so that's been 6.5 years or so ago to this point in time.
Okay, wow. I already knew of the AA from a long time ago, but I think for some people, and I know chatting to Phil, that there's a big push to try and say, look, we are here, and it's an important reason that we need to exist, because we get to places that you can't go. Not because you're not allowed, but you're probably never going to have the capacity, but we could. And it was really exciting to see how the thing that people are drawn by that relationship with God, the knowledge of Scripture to some point. I mean, that's the bedrock of so many churches across the UK, and that's pretty much all of them, really, you'd hope. But then the EA are there to sort of, how do you function? I mean, because you're not like looking after all the churches in terms of you need to do this and that. How does the EA actually function to support churches from different denominations, Baptists and Anglicans and Methodists and Pentecostals? How then do you actually help churches?
I think our posture, first and foremost, is to lean in, to build relationships and to listen well. I see a big part of my role in the mission team, and did particularly through the pandemic and still now, is to really be engaging with leaders, picking up on points of need. We do lots of roundtable conversations where we draw leaders in from all different spheres, whether we're talking around mental health, it could be around evangelism, it could be around sexuality, just over the course of the year, whether it's online webinars, roundtables and so on. There are lots of points of connection, of conversation, where we're rarely the experts in the room, but we can often draw leaders together and bring in experts that help, really, again, listen, but delve into some of these tricky and contentious subjects. But for me personally, and again for the wider mission team, a lot of it is about that listening well, seeing where the points of needs are, producing resources or training, or bringing, again, as a unity organisation made up of almost 600 organisations, we're about 6,000 churches and 25,000 individual members. We have lots of amazing relationships to draw on. And I guess in that, we're trying to really see, where are the points that churches are needing us to step into the gap, almost to either develop resources that will serve them. So as you can imagine, particularly at this point in time, as we look at, say, relationships and sex education being taught in our schools and on the curriculum, again, we've produced a resource called Time to Talk, which helps to equip parents to have greater confidence to speak to not just their own children and young people, but also to engage with their schools appropriately, respectfully, but with some, policy and some thoughts around that. In other areas as well, again, we try and equip the church in. We often have leaders saying, how do I preach or speak on some of these are big cultural issues? We've produced other resources like Being Human or sermon outlines and so on, which we hope absolutely don't tell churches what to do. We never do that, but just to serve them in whatever way that we can, so that they feel stronger and rooted in, again, all things evangelical, rooted in the Bible, and hopefully equipping them for what goes on in their local church. Big part of my role would also be to work with those who do lead toddler groups or children's youth ministry, family discipleship, or indeed seniors ministry, and to journey with a lot of leaders in various different networks and pockets that we help host and work in partnership with others with. But again, in those situations, to be saying, how do we really keep the main thing the main thing? In all the valiant work that's happening, how do we really draw out that Christian distinctiveness? So I think there's almost two pockets, going back to your question. One is that missional edge of how we listen, serve, and equip the church. And in the broader political sphere, actually, I think part of our role is to sometimes take the hits. Gavin and others who I've mentioned, we're often asked to speak with that Christian evangelical voice into some of the really tricky subjects, as we've seen recently, assisted dying, conversion therapy, you name it. But to speak to the Guardian, the Times, to be in number 10 with the Prime Minister, that's both the privilege and the responsibility that we have. But all of it is really to serve local church, listen well to church leaders, and hopefully take their voice into those different aspects to really see the church grow and to be more effective in this time and space as well. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Just some of the breadth, really, I guess, that we cover, but equally the importance of the relationship on the ground in serving the local church in this time.
Which is so valuable, because whatever your role in a church is, if you're paid in any way by a church, I was a children and families worker for a while, whether you're the minister or that, or whatever role it is, it can be quite scary, because you're probably the only one in your sphere of people that who's doing what you do. When you get to sort of children youth worker, well, maybe you'll hook up with another church, maybe not, if you've not got the time, and this is just your Friday night thing and you work full time. So to have people that can kind of collectively bring information is such a valuable resource that I think it's easy to think, well, it's boring. No, it's really not, because it's a stuff that individuals aren't going to have the time for, but people like you do. And what you're coming up with is so important and so valuable for people, I suppose, at the coalface, if you want to use the analogy, of local mission. Because where do you get your information from? There's 1,000 courses out there. You can be bombarded. People will mail you, use my course. But that's the information. I mean, I just keep coming back to this one. 53% of people know a practicing Christian. That's every other person that we meet.
Yeah.
And then you've got the EA on the side saying, okay, well, here's something you can do. Here's a suggestion. Let's get you talking to other people doing the same stuff, because that is such a force multiplier, I think, of the work that we can do as individuals, because we are not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's powerful, isn't it? And I guess part of our role is to, with the research that we've mentioned, it's to paint and inform the church as to what that big picture missional landscape looks like. But all of that is only to serve the local church at grassroots level, in your church, in mine, in your friendship group, in mine. What does it actually look like on the ground? So absolutely, part of the joy that we have genuinely as a unity organisation is to work across the breadth of the church to pool some of those resources together. So as an example, on our eauk.org website, there's a page or a few pages called Great Commission. And under those Great Commission pages, we have a huge number, about 200 resources that are listed on there for for discipleship, that are not all ours. They're from a huge range of organisations. And the aim of that is to be, exactly as you said, a bit of a one-stop shop that people can go, and whether it's different seasons that they want resources for, whether it's around evangelism itself or training, they can go there. So absolutely, part of our heart is to almost be, the table upon which there's loads of resources that people can come and look and find. And we love working in partnership for exactly that reason, because we are stronger together, aren't we? And we're not precious. We love to give it all away. But I think you're right. The information, I think, that we see at that big picture level, I hope that when myself or others, because we almost have that bit of a bird's eye view, and that only comes from, as we were saying, engaging with leaders all around the UK. We have offices and work that goes on in Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, the north of England. It's a total privilege to be leaning into leaders like that and saying, what's happening on your patch? Where are you seeing God at work here? And to put all of that together is a real joy to, in some circumstances, as I'm sure we meet many weary church leaders who are doing amazingly valiant jobs, serving the church, all the pastoral issues, dealing with these big cultural conversations, speaking into the midst of that. But to be able to go, as I did, even in Hull, which is where I believe you live as well, but where other people, all around the country, to be able to say to people, yes, but what I'm seeing and hearing is God is doing this here, and in the north he's doing this, and in the southwest he's doing this, and to put all of that together, I think, against where sometimes we as the church can feel divided, demoralised, certainly tired for all that we're doing, actually to be able to share from an EA broader perspective, myself and other colleagues, some of that, hopefully the good news, the encouragement of where we see God at work. I really hope and pray that it just goes to encourage people to keep going, because that's what we need to do, isn't it? Taking rest at times as well. But in the midst of that, just knowing that God is powerfully at work. And people are, going back to what we were saying earlier, people outside the church are really open to hear that as well.
It's true. It really, really is true. And we step back at our peril, because we should be stepping forwards with the good news, because we are the answer, not us, but the good news. That is the answer to every issue and every problem in life. There is a biblical or a God type response of peace and hope. How can people get in touch with what you're doing, especially this the Talking Jesus research? Is that, I guess it's on the EA, but I don't know if it's got a separate thing. But how do people engage with some of this material?
Yeah, well, if people would love to know more of those UK snapshots and some of the research, that's all free and accessible to download on talkingjesus.org. As you mentioned earlier, we are definitely stronger together, aren't we? And that sense of just being in the mix, hearing of these new resources, hearing of what's coming out of Westminster and the Christian Voice, seeing what's happening in the mission field. Yeah, if any listeners are interested, we would love to invite you to join us as an individual member of the EA. That's the best possible way to hear of what we're doing, what's coming out, how we can serve the church. So I'd love, it's just £3 a month. So it's less than the price of a coffee, really, isn't it? But people can join us, eauk.org/join us. But just on that website, eauk.org, there is loads about the different work that we do, all of those resources that I mentioned under Great Commission, pages around our Talking Toddlers work, around all the family discipleship, around all the advocacy work. So there's a vast amount to connect with us, and we'd absolutely love people to contact us through the website. If people want to contact me directly, very happy for people to email me on r.heffer@eauk.org. And so my name is Rachael, and I'd love to join with people. If they'd love me to help present some of the Talking Jesus research, I'd happily connect with local churches, local networks, just so that together we can really look at what the world at large is saying, how people are connecting, how open people are, and how, as we said at the beginning, strapline, making Jesus known, how we do that together, and really pray that we'll see an impact going into a new year as well. What a great opportunity we have.
Amen to that. Rachel, thank you so much. It's been a thrill and a joy. I think some people hear data, statistics, percentages and think, not for me. No, this is really exciting stuff. And hear this, 45% of people believe that Jesus died and rose again. That's every other person. And of that, 53% of people in the UK know a practicing Christian. Let's join those two bits together. People believe in Jesus, he died again, rose again, and they know a Christian. Let's have those conversations. I don't wish you finish with a conclusion like that, but I think that's the point, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just, can I throw one more in just to
Go
leave
for it.
a really good note? One of the headlines for me from the Talking Jesus research, and again for many, many church leaders, well, thousands now that we've expanded on this research with, the one piece that they often take away is this, that from the research, it told us that when we asked non-Christians if they'd be open to a conversation about faith, if they've already had an opener conversation, we found that 1 in 3 people said yes, that they'd be really open and wanting and willing to go further to find out more. So I think that's really good news. It was 1 in 5 going back a number of years, so it shows there's been a shift, and hopefully for all of us that encourages us that actually people are not closed, they are open. 1 in 3 of your friends, my friends, around our tables, whatever we're celebrating or getting together or in the pub, 1 in 3 people are open to have a conversation about the Christian faith. So I think that's massively encouraging, massively challenging, but hopefully that encourages people to just think, what could that look like for them? Who are those friends? Who might the 1 in 3 be?
Rachel from the Evangelical Alliance here in the UK, and thank you so much for your time. I actually like statistics, but thank you. It's really encouraging, and it is exciting as we're going towards Christmas. But it's an exciting time to be alive because I think, as we said off air before, God is still alive and He's still in control.
Absolutely, amen to that. Yes, great opportunity. Let's just go for it. Be a bit bolder and braver. As I said, what's the worst that can happen?
I love that. Rachel, eauk.org if you want to know more. eauk.org. Rachel, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.